Hi, this is PrivateerStation, and today we bring you day 549 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Olexiy Arestovych, and Yuriy Romanenko and Nikolay Feldman. They start the stream with a secret meeting that Yuriy Zaluzhny, head of Ukrainian command, had with NATO. Our usual thanks go to our members. Today it is Topia SR and Ludmila Skryantova, and of course, thank you, Bill, for your support. And with this, let's deep dive into day 549. Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha, my name is Nikolay Feldman. These are War Diaries with Olexiy Arestovych. Direct stream is happening on Olexiy Arestovych's channel, on Alpha&Omega, and on the channel of Yuriy Romanenko as well. Hello Nikolay, hello Alexei. One quick ask, those who are watching us live, please do not forget to click the like button, because it does help us to promote that a bit higher. Alright, let's start with the first news. I think that deserves attention. In the middle of August, it is reported that Yuriy Zaluzhny met on the Polish border with NATO representatives, and they were discussing military strategy. Yes, on Guardian we had an article. One of their representatives published information that Zaluzhny indeed has met with NATO, and that article touches upon Britain participating in support for Ukraine and outlines that 11 days ago there was a secret meeting of high-ranking NATO officers in an undisclosed location on the Ukrainian-Polish border to meet with Yuriy Zaluzhny, who is the head of Ukrainian command. Yes, head of command. Okay, and they're calling this a military council, a discussion that lasted for 5 hours and was dedicated to resetting Ukraine military strategy. And the main question was what to do with counteroffensive, how to reshape it to make it more effective. And the plans of military actions for the near future were also discussed in the context of the fact that the war might prolong further and more war activity may be happening during winter and next spring. What the article tells us is that it's not only American General Christopher Cavoli, but also Sir Anthony Radkin was present at this meeting, who is being recognized both in Washington and in Kiev as an important actor, an important participant who helps to provide proper help to defend against Russian invasion. It was his figure got into some limelight after Radkin went to Kiev without any additional officials, and he met with Zelensky discussing new ways that Ukraine is waging war on the front and trying to understand better the strategy and the strong sides and the weaknesses. We did talk about the disconnect that the West has with understanding about how Ukraine is waging its war, how Ukraine is liberating its territories, and there are some concerns that it may take longer to liberate the occupied territories, and that liberation of Crimea may take longer and more efforts than initially planned. So Milley cannot visit Kiev, but Radkin basically performs that functional shuttle mission that allows to coordinate these actions together. And here there are several quotes in this article. British sources do not say much about this meeting, but according to the statements, the strategy indeed has changed. One of the insiders said that you can see that Ukraine is concentrating on Zaporozhye side of the front, following the Ukrainian push near Takmak. And then they talk more about Radakin and his weight in the military bureaucracy of Britain on the background of different changes in British politics. But for us, I think what's interesting is that the West is trying to, and first of all, Britain is trying to find more effective ways to enhance Ukrainian counteroffensive. They're looking for organizational and military angles and tools to do that. Well, I guess first and most important is that the West did not forget about us, despite of all the screams from Russia that the West will abandon Ukraine, and despite the statements of the Republican debate, where most of them did express a non-complimentary position towards Ukraine. The only thing I want to say here is that strategy needs correcting, the term strategy, for their discussion. Strategy is what you need to win the war. What they were discussing is moving or shifting the main effort towards Zaporozhye front. This is operative level, this is not strategic level, and I would not abuse the word strategic in this regard. And this is what the fight is going over, as I showed before, railroads and automobile roads. Here's Takmak, here's Melitopol. You can check the distance from the front line to Kamysh-Zarya. That's a road and railroad junction. This is the distance that our troops need to get to cross. And this is the distance to Takmak and further to Melitopol. And beyond that is Crimea. So, of course, getting to Melitopol will cut the mouth on all the roads that lead to Crimea. Because if you go there, you go down to Mariupol, and if you go more in a more southwestern side, you easier cut access to Crimea. And then what makes me smile is the journalist discussion that we did shift the effort to Melitopol and Kherson front. In the end of May, we actually started our military operation in that part of the front. So I think not much changed, but I think that we can also look at that and say that in general, our allies do recommend to be less active on the eastern front and probably more active on the southern front. And as I said before many times, taking Bakhmut or even going to Svatova at best, it's operative level of success. And with all respect to commanders and fighters on the eastern front and their heroism daily, that is still a not so important part of the front, in my opinion. There is 3rd, 59th, and other professional brigades there, which are dearly missed on the southern front. Because any success down here, any exit to the mouth of Crimea is a strategic success. This is basically a return of Russian Federation, de facto, minus 5 or 10 kilometers on the eastern front. This is bringing them back to the state of pre-war borders in 2022. And this is Russian strategic defeat on this war, at least on this stage of war. So what we put on different scales, you maybe put 100 kilometers on the eastern front, square kilometers, or a total success on the southern front. And I think Zaluzhny understands that totally fine. And other people need to get this message. Regarding Britain, I think they're the most realistic team that understand details and depth of this conflict and geopolitical framework and political framework. I'm yet to meet other allies from the West who have such depth and breadth of understanding of this war. But they have one deficiency, is they don't have enough funds, they don't have enough resources. They were the first ones to give us storm shadows, and they're helping us to lobby our interests and help us to support, to get support from the West. Unlike America, where we've seen the discussion of Republicans recently, who poured some cold water on expectations of many, Great Britain is fully supportive of Ukraine. So what we need to mention here is that the message to change the effort on the front needs to be sent not to Zaluzhny. I think the receiver is a little bit above him. The recipient should be the next person up. And as a resume, Brits don't have much resources, but they're doing their darndest best to support us in this fight. One more thing, there was an other article in Wall Street Journal while you're talking about Zaluzhny. We see that Zaluzhny actually started to behave more actively in the media field. He started to make some statements out to the media. He actually did make a comment that we are very close to breaking through Russian front in the south. And in Wall Street Journal there was another article, I will not fully quote it, but it writes about his polemics with American generals, and he's telling them, you don't understand the nature of this conflict. And one of the American bureaucrats is basically outlining that message and saying that Ukraine is telling Americans this is not counterinsurgency activities, this is like Kursk during the Second World War, which, by the way, as a reminder, Kursk was one of the main fights, one of the main battles of the Second World War between Germany and Soviet Union. And I want to say here, Yuri, that Zaluzhny doesn't really pick words. He can say as he thinks to whomever, and I would say that he is sending the direct message, but in America they have a systemic error. Not all of them, and not too deep. They either don't get it, really, or they're trying to play some other delicate game. But I would say up front that this delicate game is not in our interest, because one yet has to explain me the benefits of letting Russians to dig in for 9 months, or that we still don't have ATACMS missiles or F-16s that are performing duties on the front line. I think this is too delicate of a line to explain to anyone. And Zaluzhny doesn't want to believe any explanations in this regard, so he's not picking words. He is saying it as it is. And I'll put a couple more quotes here from Wall Street Journal. Americans are not only attacking the line of Ukraine and their behavior in war, but there is also another side. There are some American generals who are actively criticizing White House position. For example, Yuriy Romanenko, general of aviation of Air Force in retirement, he does say that when America is conducting its battle, it's always doing it with a total advantage in the air. Ukraine doesn't have it. Also, Ukraine doesn't have precise long-reaching artillery and missiles. So when we are saying that Ukraine is not effective on the front, on the counteroffensive, we need to look in the mirror. Why? Oh, he is correct, Yuri. Yeah, he. By the way, he is a retired general, but he does still have connections, and he is expressing the opinion of military command. And we've met with different generals and different military figures from the United States. Many of them, and politicians too, and leadership, they understand, and they would want better participation of the United States in this war in terms of delivering the right nomenclature and doing it on time. Because the war on the operative level is not about meters and yards and kilometers and miles, but it's about rhythms, because you need to be very timely in fighting your enemy. So American politics is a bit confusing in this aspect, and when they're saying that we are not achieving certain results on the battlefront, I'll bring once again that we, with smaller numbers of troops, are advancing. We're liberating our territory without air support, without certain type of precision and long-range missiles. We are doing something that is deemed impossible in American military books. So when we're talking about lack of success, let me show exactly that lack of success. See the concentration of Russian troops? All these are individual detachments. Each diamond is a separate unit. So they concentrated, the Russian side concentrated their troops in 2 locations for the most part. You can look at the width of this corridor. It's 7 to 8 kilometers at least. And there is active motion on the side flanks as well, to Verbovoye, to Prokopivka, and all that Russian side is very ill managed because they have a big mix of different detachments from different branches of military. So it's a zoo on their side, and they've never been too strong logistically. And it also means that they don't have enough in the other directions. And what if we get a third piece on the front where we push deeper, or we throw more units here in this breach? Who will be defending this, and this? So, on one hand, I take it with irony. Sometimes I just get a little agitated when the Western media is telling that we are unsuccessful with our counteroffensive. It is a successful counteroffensive. It might last longer, it might take another couple months, or even go deeper into the wintertime. It's just incorrect message that they're sending that Western media is sending to the world. And I would also say here, Olexiy, that this meeting that Zaluzhny had with our allies, it did underline that the war inevitably goes into winter. It will be a long war, and it will leak into 2024. Oh yeah, that's absolutely inevitable. The moment when we got transferred F-16s by our allies, it did highlight that the war is going into winter phase, and next year. It does confirm, Olexiy, your supposition that Russia will cancel any negotiations, or if there will be negotiations, they will not lead to anything. Right, Nikolay. Putin only goes to... His aim is to wait it out by time till Trump's elections. And yesterday's debates only made him happy. And most of... there are different candidates, but Trump is still de facto lead on the Republican side, so that's Russian strategy. They will aggregate probably another 400,000 and throw them to the front and say, hey, just hold these positions. So until that happens, we need to break the southern front, and we need to shut it down. Because imagine winter campaign front the size of the purple border, or if you also have that red insert in the middle, like it is now, that allows the enemy to concentrate, to bring more people, to carry out some operations there. Because even if they bring 500,000 people here, they don't have much resources. They have rifles circa 1945, and their gear is about this, just as old. So they won't be able to do much, but all they're going to do is just throw them bodies in the trenches to slow us down. And that's what I'm saying here. We have 2, maybe 3, at max 4 months to finish with the South, so that they would sit in defense and won't even dream about counteroffensive on our positions. So what you're saying is that if you take this part of the front out, yeah, imagine that. If that middle one is taken out, it becomes so much easier on the whole perimeter. We just cut out a third or half of the whole perimeter of the front. And we can concentrate our efforts in other parts of it. These are perfect conditions to actually destroy them. Nobody canceled the concept of doing special operations, of course, but the main principles of waging war are still there. And American concepts of using drones and aviation, searching for insurgents, that's one concept. But in reality, this war just outlined the major principles of waging wars, same as they were in 1941, in 1914, in 1870s, 1850s, 1812s, and the same as were in marathon battle back in the ancient history. Concentration on the main direction, using big armies, using effectively different kinds of troops together. And the main effort of counteroffensive is to make sure we cut out that piece of the front. Western military do understand that. Now it's up to their politicians to understand that. Zaluzhny and ours, we do understand that. If you take the position of the Western military, I don't hear much of it, really. Well, yeah, Nikolay, Western military cannot just go out and comment on everything outside. It's here every lieutenant can go and criticize the general commander, or some military officers some soldiers even can do streams from the front. Western censorship, military censorship, would not allow them to do direct streams. They're pretty strict in terms of what can be shown. So this is a different culture that we have. Our military political culture is very different. So their high-ranking officers cannot express their opinion directly, but for them, it's usually retired officers, retirees who are expressing messages. All the generals, they are members of different commissions, public forums, think tanks, etc., where they make a lot of decisions and develop the politics and lines that they will be using. So overall opinion is being usually expressed by retired generals. So I'll be looking carefully at Hodges, at Breedlove, and the others who are saying the proper messaging, who do not really censor themselves and who send messages. So the opinions of Breedlove and Hodges, they actually do represent the joint opinion of American military, who would want a deeper and more total destruction of Russian troops that invaded Ukraine. They want military catastrophe for Russia. Politicians do not want that. Politicians are on the other side. They're saying, no, we don't need it. We don't need 20 Kadyrovs in the place of Russia or 20 Prigozhins with nukes. And that's a controversy here. So I wanted to address here, Olexiy, that politicians, the way they're presenting it, is that military do not consider certain political and longer-term risks. No, and military cannot really say anything to this regard. No, that's not true. Military are looking deeper. They're looking further into the possible conflict with China, so they need to wrap up this conflict faster. Also, who said that destruction of Russia militarily means destruction of Russia and separation it into different pieces? Nobody. They probably will be weaker, but they very likely will consolidate around Putin again, or the central power, whoever it will be. So that could be a different side of argument, but politicians have their opinion, and they're making decision. Military have their opinion, but they are not the group making decisions. Do they have strong arguments? Yes, absolutely. And frankly, each strategy has its own argument. Even Kissinger's strategy, which I do not appreciate, has a certain reality behind it, because it exchanges territory for membership in NATO, right? So we are arguing different positions, and I want us to have a good cultural argument and do not accuse everybody in treason or leaving us, but I would want to analytically look at the group of arguments on this side and on the other side. Personally, I would want complete military destruction of Russia here, so they would run like Napoleon army, dressed in women's clothes to try to save their butts. I do not see a serious risk on the Russian side after this destruction. I understand the argument, but I do not see that as a serious risk. And then the collective voice of American military actually matches what my opinion as well. Breedlove and Hodges, they also in support of utter military destruction for Russian Federation in this war. And basically providing more arms will allow us to as well have more opportunities to relieve stress on our fighting troops. And if we cut out the middle of this front, the Zaporozhye part and Kherson part of this front, it would make so much easier for us to hold the eastern front and then the Crimean Peninsula mouth than fighting for that whole huge front. And we only have about 3 months left worth of time, and they need to be used very effectively. And now let's go to the actual news. I think we will be using these this time right and successfully. The other matter is that it could have been used more effectively and things could have happened faster. And now it's the race. Will they be able to mobilize faster and throw just dumb infantry units, ill-trained with old rifles, to hold us, or we'll be able to break through until they do it? And for that we need more arms, more efforts. We need to make sure military supplies keep flowing steady. We need to make sure to also probably bring some of the efforts, some of the troops from the Eastern Front down to the south. And that is a question that we can ask of our military leadership and leadership in general. Why? Why are we wasting efforts on the East? Because these things are obvious, right? Okay, Alexei, I think one more thing is important here that was actually voiced in the stream already, and in the West, it being brought up over and over again. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, did make a statement today that we understand the conflict may last longer, but we are eager to support Ukraine as long as necessary because we cannot let Russia win in their aggression. So they do outline the fact that the war goes into next year, there will be a winter campaign, and it will be difficult for Ukraine, regardless if Russians will continue advancing or continue trying to advance, or if we will be advancing. But the Russian side is preparing to take on our strategic infrastructure using drones and missiles as well. So I think what's important for us is to have stability, inner stability in the country and external stability. So look, Russians were preparing for our counteroffensive for 9 months. They built all these lines, Surovikin lines and the others. What do you think? Do we have to build the same lines on our front lines? I actually brought it up several times. I have a lot of questions that I do not understand, and I refuse to understand them. This is idiotic position, I think. So look, Svatovo-Kupinsk, they actually dug the lines there. But where are ours? It doesn't exist there. What, we don't have concrete factories? We do. You don't have people or excavators that can come there and build up some defense lines? Why don't we have a complete defense line here on this front, in 4 lines? Maybe near Kharkov, yeah, put some landmines or something there on our northern borders. Perhaps here we would need a defense line as well. It does exist in some places, but there's no systemic work on the scale that Russia was doing. We did not have that. So everybody who are close to the topic of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, they know that all the time that we were fighting there, in Lugansk region, I don't think there were any yard of trenches dug. And the question why was not done should be question number 1, right? Because unlike Russians, whom we'll throw out of our territory eventually, we will need these lines later. Even when the war is over, having a constant military threat from Russian Federation. Because and even if something happens on the border later, the fights will be in the same directions, same areas. So in this case, we'll just have to reinforce what we already built now, later in the future. So there are many questions that we do not have answers to. And I think they're still actual, to say the least, especially on the background of necessity to go into winter campaign. And by the way, American Senator Lindsey Graham also confirmed that message. And he did, by the way, say that the elections in Ukraine should happen next year, despite the continuation of war. He did say continuation of war. So how do you think it's realistic to conduct elections during the war times? I think the West will find a way to help us to do that. They'll find ways to do it. And I'm quoting here, we do want Ukraine to have honorable discussions, and we want to send a message to the world that Ukraine did change, that it is a different country, it is not a corrupt country that is being portrayed from the years before. It has changed during this war, and it needs to reaffirm that by running proper political elections. And I want to say here, Yuri, that United States are indeed emphasizing the need in our elections, because what it does, it creates legitimacy, it basically aids our acceptance by the West. And July next year, there'll be a summit in the United States before presidential elections. And it would be good if they actually understood what is happening in Ukraine. Yeah, the message that needs to be sent is important. And today we had Shokin coming out on Fox News and some other media channels, and they will be using all kind of, I'm looking at his statements, I see that they'll be using all old stories and all the old dirty laundry, because the Trumpian part of Republicans picked up the statement by Shokin about Biden's son and his relations with Burisma that were discussed. So this just shows that our topic will become number one, I guess. Oh yeah, they are using that topic in their politics. In America, I would say, Yuri, there is a real civil war happening in a different format, but it is a civil war, one can say, because Republicans and Democrats, their views on many things are so incompatible. They are at each other's throats ideologically. And we need to say that Republicans, who have pretty good chances in the coming elections, and they already took Senate or reinforced their positions in Senate, they are fighting for a presidential position, and all they're fighting is, or at least one of the main rhetorics that they're using, is that aid to Ukraine needs to be limited. And I'll tell you more, they actually understand Ukraine as a battle hammer of the leftists, as sort of the chain dog of the leftists. And when I'm talking to them, I'm trying to send a different message. I'm saying, guys, it is not so. Ukraine has the biggest number of religious organizations. Here, if not in the world, but at least in Europe, we have 78% who say that they're actively belonging to some church. It is an important factor for the Republican side. And they, on the back end, say, well, okay, that's good, but what about your courting LGBTQ, etc. topics? And then you have to explain that Putin is not a conservative. You guys are wrong supporting him because he is a criminal. We are the conservative values. We're fighting the actual criminal syndicate. And we're trying to keep the actual values. And this is a secret. This is a serious conversation because they're very principled in their views. This is a very serious conversation that needs to happen. Because our people here often do not understand that for many of them, faith and Protestantism and all kinds of beliefs that they express, they're actually serious about that. Very often when you communicate with them, you have a feeling that you actually are talking, in a good meaning of this word, with zealots, with fanatics of their belief. And they're basically scanning you from the beginning. Are you about values or are you about money? And if you're not about values, they don't even want to talk to you. And imagine how they look at our corruption scandals and things that bubble up sometimes. So we have very difficult position in the American agenda, and it's time to ring the alarm and take serious measures in regards to Ukrainian question being represented correctly in the United States in the best light for us. Not that we need to deceive them on something, no, but we need to send the message of what really is happening, and we need to correct their understanding of who is Putin. They really are it's a sharp fight there. Jordan Peterson recently was banned from teaching in Canadian educational establishments, and this is a serious question. Their infighting is very sharp, and a lot of things depend on that, including future support to Ukraine. And I cannot say that we're well represented now. Look at the first presidential debates that happened on the GOP side. And American primaries, they usually help define the position a year before elections. And that position will be very rough, and it will be only getting more defined. And this is the situation when the voter will be affecting the candidate. And we, to say the least, we do have problems with a big part of Republicans. Not us, but how we are represented there. We need to work on that. And perspectives there are far from beautiful. And this is what Putin is making his stakes on. He is eager to waste 500,000 more people on this front. Unarmed, poorly trained, throw them under the tracks of the tanks and HIMARS and everything, and our FPV drones and everything that we are hitting them with, but still try to drag as far as he can to elections of any Republican, preferably Trump in his mind. And one cannot say that it doesn't have a rational core, that strategy. Looking at the first candidate's discussion on the GOP side, he has a reason behind this position. The fact is that we cannot affect external factors too much, but we can affect our reality. So if we cut out that piece of the front, it will be much more easier for us to continue working. Even if, for example, the supply and support goes down at some point, it will be much easier for us to hold the front lines when we don't have to take care of these 700 kilometers on the south. And of course, military in the West, they are taking certain positions. Of course, they'll be appealing to certain lines of support for Ukraine, etc., and calling to the voice of reason. But we still need to be very active. And one needs to understand the discussion happening on the West is not a reflection of the real success on the front by Ukraine, but it is a reflection of their inner fighting. The main point is they're using that in internal fights between the left and the right. They're using us for inner political messaging to pick the strong or the weak arguments. And one side would say, we don't need to give them any help, they're not really doing anything. The other side actually needs to point out and explain what is happening and why is it important. So here we need to pose a question on a high value, on the level of high values. Not when we take Melitopol, but where is the United States going to, and where is Europe going? Where is Ukraine going with all that? That would be the debate level we want to participate in. You know, I think Olexiy took that position early in this year when they were discussing, analyzing positions of Trump and DeSantis, and they were talking about this conflict as some remote borderline conflict that America has nothing to deal with. Oh yeah, they did start it back in the day, and people who are suggesting us to follow Korean scenario, they're actually sincerely offering that to Ukraine, telling that it could be worse. This is their main argument, that please take this position of two divided territories because they think that we will not be able to make it any better. So this is a serious fight we need to wage on all levels for our future. All right, we have about 62,000 watching us on Alpha. Oh, we have a competitor. Usyk is fighting in the sports. Okay, yeah, right. But people are watching us here on Alpha, on Romanenko and Alexiy's channel, so a quick reminder, please click the like. There was one more event that might affect the F-16 transfer. The air catastrophe in Zhytomyr region, where two jets collided. Do you think it will affect anything? No, I think it's just a technical episode. They were training and practicing, and while training pilots, different accidents happen, and they happen everywhere, in Israel, in the United States, everywhere, especially military, when they're doing serious maneuvering. And one of the well-known pilots of Ukraine died. Actually, three died, but one of them was very well-known. My condolences to his relatives. This is a big loss, and it is also a day of Ukrainian Air Force today. I want to congratulate, by the way, all of our Air Force with their day, and I want to raise a virtual glass for the lives of those who are in the skies, who are defending the lives of those who are on the ground. Pilots are a different breed of people, and military pilots are triple that. And thank you guys for being there. I would remind you that the best experts in the world forecast 3 hours or 3 days at max for our aviation to exist since the beginning of this war. And it's a second year, and we are successfully hitting Russian targets. And if we get, or when we get F-16s, we will increase our efficacy. So, yeah, we should probably remember those pilots who died in the catastrophe. Drone attacks on the territory of Russia, which are notably increasing, are designed to show Russian public opinion that Ukraine has something to answer to Russian missile strikes on their territory. Oh, Nikolay, I love how civilian journalists write these articles. That's hilarious. So we're launching 600 drones just to show and change public opinion in Russia. and they're forgetting that we actually attacked a certain military positions of Russia and destroyed so much of their ammo dumps that they had several dozens of destroyed soldiers with them. And they're not writing about that. They're writing about public opinion, right? So they're journalists. They're talking about what's, I guess, closer to them, public opinion. No, each drone has, be it water drone or aerial drone, has a certain goal, a certain target, and it is trying to solve that target. And of course, we can be glad that we can launch 70 or 100 drones at night, as they did. But trust me, the main goal is military target for each of these drones. Public opinion is a side effect. The basis for correct communication is strong decision. Strong decisions communicate themselves. You don't need to outline them too much. So, with all respect to Washington Post, New York Times, and other journalists and guardians, there are still civilians who are looking at this world from their window. They're trying, they're doing their best, but their field of view is very specific. Yura, do you have any notes? What Yura? Maybe you have anything to comment on this? No, not at the moment. All right, then let me talk about the other one. Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs came out with a statement addressing the blockade of Ukrainian grain. And what should be our policy? Well, I think, first of all, we shouldn't be violating the rules of the countries that we're using to transport our grain through. And it's not a secret, we did violate a few agreements when we, in terms of how we supplied grains through those countries, and there were some violations. And I mean, Poles, they're really friendly to us. But even Poland, as the country who tried to organize this export on the land, they actually had to address certain deficiencies. And to say the least, yeah, we did violate some things. So we should be punishing the ones who are violating, who are breaking certain agreements. Did we punish them? Because if we want East Europe to participate more actively, we need to do that. Because Eastern Europe is really seriously interested in helping us. They understand that they are next if we fail. And they indeed don't want to be on the other side of Iron Curtain again, so they are our allies. It's literally, we need to be careful in how we deal with them. I think it's the old story of short-sightedness, that sometimes some people go for short-term benefits, foregoing the long-term strategies. Poles were letting us to go through Gdansk and go through other routes, but instead some of our suppliers use that to just dump grain on the Polish market with big damage to Polish farmers. And that shouldn't be surprising that Poles actually reacted to that, because they're one of the parties that is very supported by agriculture sector, indeed, is being very vocal against certain Ukrainian traders who violated certain agreements. Oh yeah, I would say that short-sighted, idiotic traders that we do have here, some of them are foregoing certain values, and they're just deciding to pick another million of income, basically trade on the blood. That's what it leads to. They create additional problems for us in East Europe and problematize our relations with our allies, but they still go for that profit. I think they should all be punished. They should all hang, or be in prison. We need to follow through with the utmost urgency of military times. And this is the case when we see errors in our allies in the Eastern Europe, but we don't see our own errors. And we need to grab these people who violated these agreements, and we need to punish them. As a government, we need to be looking at that in a complex manner. And by the way, in Poland, ultra-right party ratings are going down. And that's the party that actually is voting for diminishing their aid to Ukraine. So despite despite that problem, the ultra-right party actually goes down there. Well, that's right, Nikolay. The relations between Poland and Ukraine are very tight, despite of all these tribulations. Ukrainian language is there as a second language in many parts. You can even use the bank machine and they'll be Ukrainian there. And Poles are treating Ukrainians as part of their society, the refugees that they're helping. And the questions that they ask about us, about some help to go and exhume the victims of Volhynia tragedy, this is a humanitarian matter, right? Why don't we let them go and do that? For them, it's a very important question. Ultra-right is pumping that. So just do exhumation, and all we need to do is allow them and do some joint effort, allow them to go exhume. If I was at the helm, I would create a joint Polish-Ukrainian commission or institute to make sure we work on this matter, so we do not allow the ultra-right sides there to pump it. It needs to be addressed, because otherwise it'll be put on the certain slogans. Who's doing that on the Ukrainian side? Anybody? Sometimes you want just to get some of the officials by the neck and say, what the heck are you doing? These are our closest allies. We need to make sure we are working together. And if they're asking for small humanitarian concessions, let's go do it. Because once again, we are at the crossroads when we can change the destiny of Europe. We missed one before when Ukraine went with Russia back a few hundred years ago, but this is a second chance now for Ukraine to go together with Europe. What is blocking our politicians from that? What, bones? Human bones? Is that a danger? It's a humanitarian question. And it's sentimental appeal of people who want to bury properly their relatives. So I do not understand. Why the heck are we still slow-walking that? Some stupid statements made by our politicians and attempt to play on this 1.5% ultra-radical electors that, same thing, we have a little bit here and they also have about 1%, slightly over that, who are stating we'll never forget. That's not a far-sighted policy. This is very myopic. And some of them want to pump up this message, others are trying to appeal to the other electorate and for whatever reason just making additional discombobulation in our relations. If you put that on the weights, how do we even allow for that matter to exist? We should have resolved it. We should have a collective guilt feeling for what's happening there, for that old story that needs to be fixed. And people who made mistakes by not letting that being reviewed should not be let into politics again. They should be named, qualified, defined, and they should get a black mark forever. Because one time when they choose their pocket instead of national interests, that should be a disqualifying factor for continuing in politics. All right, great, Alexei. Let's go to Russian politics. Lukashenko commented on the story with Prigozhin. Oh yeah, Putin also came out and commented on that. Right, Putin and Lukashenko. They're both saying that nobody gave guarantees. Lukashenko said that nobody guaranteed Prigozhin's life. And before that, he said that he arranged for his exit to Belarus. So how do you see these positions? Well, what positions? First, he announced himself to be a savior of Putin and Moscow from Prigozhin, and also savior of Prigozhin from Putin and Russia. And now, since Prigozhin is killed, he came out and said, oh, I knew all that before. You know, Lukashenko is a character who knows everything beforehand. Where was the attack prepared from? He knows what's happening where, what's happening in Saudi Arabia, in Arab Emirates. And he has special phones that he makes calls through. So it's like classic Odessa formula. I wish to be as smart as my wife after. So Lukashenko is always perfect hindsight 2020. But foreseeing has a very good criteria. At first, you need to foresee in public and say that's what's going to happen, and people need to acknowledge that, and then the event happens. But it doesn't work the other way. When the event happens, and then you come out and say that I've foreseen that. So the statement by Lukashenko brings him dangerously close to the level where Dmitry Medvedev starts. So I would recommend Lukashenko to hold his horses a bit if he wants to be received as at least a little bit more serious figure than Medvedev, because he's dangerously close to the line where somebody will say out in the public that he's a clown and we shouldn't even be talking to him. He probably should start with asking questions. What are 10,000 Wagner troops doing in Belarus? Why are they? Yeah, they're not leaving? No. He said 10,000 are staying. And what are the goals and purpose of the military exercise that are doing? What is happening on the border with Poland? He doesn't want to answer these questions. And think about the scale of the event when, in order to service it, they're using two presidents or whatever, executive persons at the helm of Belarus and Russian president to run the PR and interference for that. Prigozhin, right, the man of difficult destiny, that Wagner is not being funded by Russian Federation, and now it's not funded by Russian Federation. So all these messages, they are sent to those who have very short memory, like guppy fish, who are eager to forget everything or to forgive any cruelty to their leaders. So I think these two guys, everything is pretty clear with them, who's doing what. And the only lesson that the world needs to take from it is that you cannot come to any agreement with these two. They will violate every single contract you sign with them, and then they will come out and say they've foreseen violating it, and will also use that to their advantage. Another institute, American Institute of War, said that Lukashenko will not be commenting on that deal that he struck with Prigozhin, and that American Institute had then to walk back their statement and say that yesterday we indeed prognosticated that Lukashenko will not talk about Prigozhin to not break his difficult situation with Kremlin, but the desire of Lukashenko to retain the visibility of independent leader outweighed these concerns. So why Lukashenko needs to keep the impression of legitimacy and independent leader? Well, that's his only legitimacy, Nikolay, to somewhat stay in power as a somewhat legitimate figure, because that allows him to talk to China, that allows him to talk to other countries. In the worst case scenario, things may happen to him, like Prigozhin. And I'm not even talking about direct attacks and provocations on the Polish border. So the guy already earned himself 83 Hague tribunals, but he is a sovereign leader and he cannot be indicted while he is so. So that's his main interest, so that his butt would not be transported to a Hague tribunal and something very similar to what happened to Milosevic doesn't happen to him. Okay, just got it now. On Wall Street Journal, there is another article where they call upon Biden to support Ukraine, to stop running zigzags and interference at the field. Biden is mistaken, the name of the article. And basically they're saying that it's an attempt by White House to move the guilt from the White House to Ukraine if the battle continues into the next year, into the election cycle. Despite that, Ukraine is being successful in the front, announced that they taken Rabotina on the way to Melitopol. Yet they're talking about our front position. Americans are calling upon us to just attack on the south, but journalists of Wall Street Journal is saying that consolidation just in the south has its own drawbacks, that it might allow Russia to be more active in other directions. And as one of their experts states, concentration on one front would allow Russia to redistribute their troops to that part of the front from other segments. However, strategy and critique of America of Ukrainian operations always include complete advantage in air, and they're going back to Iraq and telling that the United States wasted at least or spent several weeks to achieve complete air superiority before going into Iraq by the ground. So basically, this is a good message, right? This is a positive signal. Thank you, Wall Street Journal, for that. That is a positive signal. But this does show that the debate about Ukraine is ongoing, and it can be positive, right? So this is a good positive one as a response to negative ones that we heard before. But in this, there is a lot of posing as well, because when the United States were attacking Saddam had a very much weaker army. They had 3+ army maybe. Americans had 5 minus. They had 2 generational gap between the armies. And even then, they spent so much time for aerial campaign to make sure they have advantage in perfect conditions of desert where you cannot really hide. And only then they broke through and liberated Kuwait. And back then, at the first campaign, they didn't even go to Iraq. And we are fighting with the army that is still stronger and bigger than us, that has more artillery than we do, that has advantage in some weapons over us, and missiles and radio electronic interference and air. And then we're getting these questions: why are you so slow? Why are you not remarkably, dashingly liberating everything with one swoop? And it's a good comment about us moving troops from all the sides of the front down south, as it would allow them to bring troops from those parts to the south as well. Well, who said that that's what we should do? We should continue exerting pressure, but in a smaller degree. So we would still tie up their troops up in the other parts of the front, but provide enough pressure that would not allow them to move their troops to the south. Plus, we already proved that we can change directions of attack, and we can say that, of course, if we build all 15 brigades and throw them in one line, that'll be, of course, easy for them to destroy us, so who'd be doing it? So we are emphasizing our strategic advantage in the south, and we're fighting for increasing the front line. We're breaking through the defense lines, and we already grounded several of their detachments there completely, and we're at the first or sometimes through the first defense lines. So whenever we finish the south, we can continue adding more efforts in the east after. But we need to deep dive into these things, yes, and we need to sound arguments and counter-arguments. So thank you, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Guardians, and the rest who provide us different reasons for us to comment on that and to show more angles to how the war is fought, which arguments exist, which counter-arguments exist, so that our viewers could make their own decision. At the very end, I suggest we return back to the question of elections. I am interested to ask you mean elections in general? Lindsey Graham did mention that the elections will happen, they need to occur, they need to be held for Ukraine. We did talk about that briefly at the beginning, that somehow they will be. But in general, I understand everybody needs to follow a certain ideological framework of campaign, and we need to see some political motions. Frankly, Nikolay, I'm not awaiting anything serious from anybody except for the party of Arestovych. Why? Because that scoundrel is the only one who is asking serious question: what will happen to Ukraine in 50, in 40, in 60 years? And you may like it or not, he does have a global framework about self-identification for Ukrainian country, about the strategic elements. Everybody else, I kind of understood what they will be basing on. Let's increase salaries, let's increase pensions, so it'll be social services. But show me any of the party who poses a question on the civilization level. What is the position of Ukraine in the collective West? What is the position of Ukraine between collective West and global South? What is our relations with our nearby neighbors? We instead just say, oh, let's go join NATO. Okay, nobody's against it. We need to increase social services. Sure, who will be arguing that? So, of course, they'll be pumping more influence into their leaders to try to show them, to make them unarguable characters. and people will probably group by whom they sympathize with. But I suggest they should be looking at the higher level plank, and the debates will show. They will show the command, the teams, and the actual parties. I only call upon Ukrainians, do not make a usual mistake, because if you vote for those whom you like voting usually, then if you elect those people again in, we'll run into the same circle, and we'll have look where we are now: 12 million who are in refugee state, ruined economy. You know, this doesn't have much perspective, and we don't have time to go on the second lap. Neither time nor resources. All right, so on Alexei's channel we have about 67,000 watching us. Yuriy Romanenko, I have about 7,000. Click the like button, and Alpha has 3,500. So please do not forget to subscribe. If you are listening or watching that in English, do not forget to click subscribe to the Privateer Station. And if you can support any of the channels, that is fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, dear participants. Thank you, Yuriy. Thank you, Olexiy. And thank you, dear viewers. We'll have a next stream on Monday. On Monday at 9 p.m. we have Olexiy, and we'll see you there. Have quiet skies and have a good night.
Всем пока. Пока, до новых встреч. Тихого неба. Тихой ночи, точнее говоря, и тихого неба.